Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to us by listeners like you by using our Amazon Associates link.
It's really simple how it works. All you have to do, go to whichsidepodcast.com, click through the Amazon link, and anything you purchase through Amazon will get a kickback for. So if you're already planning on buying from Amazon, please consider using our link first. But if you're looking for something to buy to help support the show,
You should totally buy some of that Tease vegan cheese. They're not going to make it anymore. So.
they're going to make it, but only for restaurants, food services. So
yeah, you can't get it.
So you're not going to be able to get it very much longer. So head over to Amazon and get some teas while you can, because it makes the best fucking nachos. So head on over to whichsidepodcast.com, click through the Amazon link, help support the show. This is episode 137.
Yeah, we talk with SarahJane Blum.
It was a great conversation. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I say that a lot, but that's just because I just like the people we get to hang out with. What news and events do we have going on this week, Jordan?
Well, if you're in Denver, you should attend the Anarchist movie night. The movie that they're going to be showing is In the Land of the Free. That's Wednesday at Mutiny Information Cafe. If you're in Salt Lake City, you should check out the Salt Lake City Lagoon protest. That's this Saturday, June 27th at 10:30 a.m. And after that, you should stop by and go to the June Vegan Drinks and Potluck. That'll be at Piper Down, the Old World Pub.
You know, I was going to try to make that protest, but we have a full schedule.
Yeah, we do.
That day, unfortunately. So go online, show your support, or hold a solidarity protest if you can. This week's listener shout out is brought to you by Aria. They just wanted to give a quick shout out to all the folks in Barrie, Ontario, and all the amazing vegan peeps in Vancouver, British Columbia. So, shout out to you all. This week's slingshot, June 25th, 1990. You were alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were.
So were you.
I was alive. I was alive too.
Amazing time to be alive.
What a coincidence, right? Hundreds of people rallied in Madrid, Spain for an end to bullfighting. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
sometimes they're downers, but this one, not so much a downer.
No, it's a good thing to do.
It is a good thing to do. If you like these little tidbits of history, pull them out of the Slingshot Personal Organizer. They're pretty amazing to have. So, you can get one at a local info shop or an online info shop like AK Press.
You still need your love.
They always need your love. I sincerely hope you enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
So, how's your day going so far?
It is going pretty well. It actually, the weather started out crappy and now it's beautiful. So now I am sitting inside looking out the window.
Where are you located at?
Minneapolis.
How is being vegan in Minneapolis?
You know, it's funny. It's really, really easy. And there's a ton of vegans, but there's only one dedicated vegan restaurant and it's Raw, which I think is incredibly ironic considering Minneapolis is cold all but, 2 days a year.
Is it at least awesome and good?
You know,
So no.
well, I mean, I think it's run by really good people, and the only thing I can say is that the building shares its space with, Alternative Health Center, which does colonics, and the part where it says, eat food, have colonics, just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've been to quite a few vegan places that I would feel the same way, where I'm like, well, We actually have a new one here. I won't name, that me and Jordan were talking about the other day, that I'm like, I like it. I wouldn't recommend it to somebody who wasn't vegan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't frequent it, but I'm glad it's there. And
Yeah.
there are places that, and there's a ton of places that have a really vegan-friendly marketing plan that I do frequent. Like, your full case of vegan donuts. I might have bought a dozen donuts yesterday for a friend of mine's birthday.
Wait, see,
We don't have.
we have access to vegan donuts, but it's not like great access. But you can just get vegan donuts.
Yes, you can just get vegan donuts.
Fucking hell, I gotta move to Minneapolis.
I mean, there's.
Or at least you got to come visit on a day like today, one of the nice 4 days in the year.
So I only have 3 other days I can visit.
No, theoretically, it should be nice till the middle of September.
What is there to do there, to visit? What is a good reason to visit?
When I moved here, I grew up in New York City, and I was in my mid to late 20s when I moved here. And what I quickly realized is, assuming you're, pushing 30 or over 30, no matter who you are, you probably want to go out, 2 or 3 times a month. And whatever it is you're really into, you can do that often. If you're into music, if you're into theater, if you're into fancy food, if you're into going to museums or galleries, there's just enough to satiate you.
Okay.
If you want to go out every night of the week, you're screwed.
Sounds perfect.
As I get into my mid 30s, I'm more of a once or twice a month person, so I think that's perfect. So what brought you there from New York?
It actually was more circuitous than that. I was in grad school in DC at the time. I was taking care of my mother. I met a boy. He had an established life. I didn't have much of one. So as I tried to figure out my next move, and I've been visiting, off and on for a couple of years, it just made a lot of sense. And now I'm here and I love it here. And there's really a great activist community, not just animal activist community, but like a small and dedicated radical community that kind of keeps me trying to up my game. And then there's also a lot of the creature comfort stuff that we already talked about. So yeah, I really thought I was not going to be able to adjust, and then I adjusted really well.
When you say up your game, like what do you mean by upping your game for you? What's that for you?
I think it's really easy to, especially like as I've gotten older and, I have the things I think about, on a daily basis, like, my immediate family, my immediate work life, just, my immediate aches and pains of daily living, just kind of thinking about the broader world and being an engaged person who gives a damn. You can look around and see everybody else doing a worse job than you at giving a damn and get really complacent really easily. And it's hard here for me to get that complacent because I see people who are passionate about things that I certainly care about, and I want to understand better, but that, I don't have a depth of knowledge in, really kind of, like there's a deep pro-Palestinian community here. There's a lot of like police accountability work being done. So, I keep finding out about things that I wish I could be a bigger part of, that just remind me that, a good goal in life every day is to at least try to be a little better than you were the day before.
Yeah, I find myself as I got older, becoming a lot, like you were saying, becoming that more complacent, that more, I'm doing enough. I look at what other people are doing. I'm already doing so much more than so many other people. Why isn't that kind of enough? But I find myself having to push myself to do more now. more than I ever had to. I used to be just really self-driven, and it was almost like I was on a roller coaster. Like it was being pushed to do things, but now I have to drive that a lot more than I used to.
I mean, I can't speak for you, but I know for me, I think I also used to be a lot more self-congratulatory about the things that I did do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
oh yeah, for sure.
Like, even though I can say, yeah, it's harder for me to go hang out with a group of strangers who I know nothing about and, get really passionate and committed about a new atrocity that I'm only now learning about. I also feel like I'm a little bit better at both going, just at not being an asshole, if that makes any sense at all. Like,
yeah, no, it totally makes sense because, like what I was saying, like when I was very like driven, like it almost felt like a roller coaster, I was totally that asshole.
And I mean, you thought you knew everything.
For sure.
If you're anything like me, which whatever reason I'm assuming you are. Yeah.
And why everyone else wasn't what you are.
Yeah,
it was
beyond. Didn't make any sense. Yeah.
And so you wanted to force that into them.
And I mean, that's part of what I'm talking about like it sort of keeping me accountable and keeping me honest. It's a really good reminder and just getting this exposure to people who are coming at trying to make the world better from really different angles than I did or that even I do. It really kind of keeps me humble and keeps me thinking and, makes me a lot less angry at all the people who don't agree with me because, I'm sure every single week there's 5 protests I didn't go to. There's, 3 boycotts I didn't know to be a part of and, so on and so forth. I didn't sell my car this week. Yeah. And I think like that's what I love about the community here, that there's just a lot of people who really give you that right sort of chaos.
Mm-hmm. I would say maybe I'm just out of touch with it, but I feel like we've lost that a little bit here, where we don't have as much as we used to, especially like 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago the community really, really was great, but now I don't feel it as much, and maybe that's just because I've lost touch moving into the burbs and things like that.
I mean, I think it's also probably that same stuff of like we just get so balkanized by the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that might just be like my particular peeve recently. Just it's hard unless you actually get out into the physical world where you live to encounter people who aren't like you, because you come off like your worst real self, or most people do, and then they end up just only talking to people who already agree with them, and it's made it much harder than I remember it being like in the late 90s to sort of start forming connections with people who you don't already have a lot of the immediate things that are the same about you.
I remember like the first protest I ever organized, it was very simple. I made a couple flyers, people showed up, didn't know who they were, you made connections. And I don't know if you'd get that same response now just because of how people are interconnected. I don't know if you don't already have some of those connections, if people would actually go.
And then it's funny because you don't know if, let's say you're trying to get people to come out to a protest or, a teach-in or whatever it is. They can look at the list of people who've already said they're going to go and go, well, I think he's a square. I think he's a blowhard. I know by looking at the people who are already saying they're going to go that I think I know what's going to be said. I think I know what's going to be done. I think I know all the reasons it's not going to work. And just getting out of that head gets increasingly hard, is what I've noticed.
Oh, yeah.
I definitely think I'm even guilty of that still. I think I'll look at a list and I'll be like, I don't want to be around those people. It's unfortunate. That's kind of where we're at. And I think that's a lot of times when I'm organizing anything now, I try to avoid having an event list at all. Especially it's just a documentation of who's going to be there anyway. It's kind of silly.
I mean, it's fun, but it's that double-edged sword because, at some point saying to your group of peers, oh, I'm going to show up Saturday at noon makes you marginally more likely to show up Saturday at noon, which is always good because, but then it's also, it's certainly a tool of the state to look at where we're all going to be at any given time. And it's also, it really stops people. It's supposed to be a tool where we get to know each other, and then it stops us from getting to know each other.
What I always like to remind people, all these platforms, they're given to us for free because we're the product of those platforms. And so I always wonder, how, what kind of, not just the state, but what kind of other data mining is being done by these interactions or failed interactions that happen. It's probably the biggest reasons why I don't do social media.
I do social media because I don't leave, I don't get to see the people I love nearly enough. Mm-hmm. And it's really useful, but I'm getting as everybody else is trying to start to target their activism or, their radicalism within social media, I'm really finding myself asking hard questions about, can I save myself from social media? Can I think my way out of the social media box? Because if I spend time on it, reading about sports or my niece or, cute dogs or whatever, that's fine. But if I actually try to understand the world and understand the challenges that I want to be a part of facing through it, I just give up.
I also feel really bad because, from the stance of privilege that we have, because you take people in other parts of the world where these forms of social media are actually making it possible for them to make the connections that they needed to, that they were unable to make, prior due to the state. We are kind of just fuck it.
I mean, but I think there's certainly something to be said for us not getting on a high horse when we get off of social media, which people do, that oh, I'm a better activist, I'm a better anarchist, I'm a better radical, what have you, because, I don't let the state know my real name. And just recognizing that that's as much of a pose and a posture as, me taking selfies for an hour to try to figure out how I look the best. It's totally fine to have an identity and want to manage it and, but it's only one tiny part of our life.
We were talking to Scott Crow about the same thing quite a while ago, and he was toying with the idea of, instead of forcing people off of social media, making more people on social media and people become anonymous inside the masses.
That is way more hacktivisty than Begin. I like it, and I tend to I rarely hear something Scott Crow said and go, that seems foolish, It's usually got some heft to it as an idea, but how that would work is completely beyond me.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's a good thinking point, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe I'm also just I might just be a little scarred, having been through all the aughts where when the state decided to come after, the animal rights group, the animal rights community as a group, they could get to us. The things we thought we were doing to keep ourselves safe from that sort of repression, it wasn't working at all. I sort of have gone to the part of, if I'm a target, I'm a target. If I'm a target, that's sad because I'm not doing anything even cool enough to deserve to be targeted. But if I'm going to be a target, I just have to be able to live with that, because there's nothing that when I saw everybody trying to protect themselves from that, we failed. And that was even before, the AETA, that was before or, it was before the AETA. It wasn't necessarily before like the AEPA, but
Yeah.
we tried really hard to out-computer them, out-sleuth them, outsmart them. And when an apparatus as big as the state wants to come after a really small group of essentially, kids, they're going to get them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm SarahJane Blum, and I'm your downer.
No, I mean you're totally. It just made me like start thinking back to like a lot of the stuff that happened to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was arrested by the FBI just so I wouldn't protest the Olympics. Like stupid shit like that. It's just like we're trying not to do anything, to be that kind of a target, but we're a target no matter what we do because we are up there saying this is wrong, this needs to change. Going against the major systems at play.
Yeah, I mean, you can even think about it. The debate in kind of like vegan advocacy of like, do you want to be the angry vegan or do you want to be the not angry vegan? And you can be actually sitting there quietly going, I'm not trying to tell you what to eat or what to do. And people will, start screaming at you for, essentially telling them they're horrible people, even if you're saying, I'm specifically not saying you're a horrible person. So there's only so much you can do to really determine how other people are going to see you. When you feel compelled to stand up and say something that most people don't agree with.
I think it's hard for a lot of people to fully understand that while we, as animal rights activists, completely 100% disagree with a lot of their actions, that we understand that most of those actions aren't coming from a standpoint of wanted cruelty. It's more, innate learning that they just didn't know. So there isn't that as harsh as judgment as people really think there is.
Yeah. And for me, that again goes back to why I think a lot about actually, how I build real life relationships with people, because I'm not going to be able to convince somebody just by saying it that, I don't think I'm perfect. B, I don't think you're fundamentally a worse person than me. And C, I don't think that, by making this one change in your life, somehow you've undone all the damage of, our society. Mm-hmm. So it's all the messenger and it's never the message.
Yeah. It's hard for people to realize that we're talking about like a societal change, not an individual change. Like we're saying the society in general is what we want to change, and we're not going to get down on one individual person for being a part of that society. Because I was a part of that society.
And I always, I go back to like, I'm not selling my car this week. I'm still a part of that society.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just trying to be a better version of myself every day.
So what really got you on this path? Like what's your origin to activism and veganism?
I think they're similar, but they're not necessarily the same. I was fortunate to grow up with really, really engaged parents. I was thinking about like being on the Which Side Are You On podcast and how my dad and my mom would actually sing that to me as I was a little kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Obviously not, some crazy punk rock version, but actually like Pete Seeger was always on, as I was growing up. And so
probably Natalie
I was raised
Merchant.
to believe that, if you have a voice, if you have some sort of, they weren't talking in those terms, but like if you have privilege, you have to use it. If you're lucky enough to be in a position where you get listened to, if you're lucky enough to be able to do something kind, you have to do it. And that did not, in their minds, have anything to do with animals, but it did mean that, I was never 100% comfortable with eating animals. I could never eat fish when I was a little kid because I would say they smelled like their home, and that really bothered me. And then I grew up in New York City. When I was about 12, I went away with a friend and his family, and we went off to a kind of a rural island in New York. And we were riding our bikes around, and I saw roadkill. To my knowledge, I had never seen a dead animal before. And it really was like, oh, wait. Live animal, dead animal, plate animal. I'm really not okay with this. And I pretty much made the decision then. I still went home with my friend and his family and ate the food that was in front of me that weekend. But then I went back to where I actually lived with my parents and was like, I'm not eating meat anymore. And then I, was like, I'm not going to dissect. So I wrote away, in 17 magazine, there was a thing where you could write to PETA for dissection alternatives, because this is before the internet. And I did it. And so I got on their mailing list. I think that's probably how I heard the word vegan. I don't remember learning what veganism was. I do remember at some point saying when I go to college and when I leave my parents' house, I'll stop eating animal products. I'll become vegan. And then I did.
Were your parents like, did you make that connection of like, I'm going to do it when I leave because, you don't felt they would have been supportive of it?
I think it was actually the opposite. I think it was I had gotten increasingly aware of things like where, milk came from and where eggs came from. So my mom was doing this thing where she was going to the grocery store and coming back with these reusable glass bottles of, what we thought of as humane farmed milk, and like lugging them around, walking 3 blocks back and forth to, the grocery store for me with them. And she was also dealing with stuff like my father was very sick at the time, and I just couldn't imagine. I felt like they had been so good to me, and I couldn't imagine asking them to change any further. It just seemed, it just didn't seem like a reasonable choice. They were incredibly supportive. And then they were incredibly supportive as I started doing activism and getting arrested and all of that. Little freaked out, but very
little freaked out. What brought you to activism though? So like that brought you to veganism. What took you to that first step where you're like, now I need to take this and I need my voice to be heard?
Well, what brought me to animal liberation was actually, there was a little mouse in one of our classrooms who was there was like a quote unquote science experiment going on with this mouse in my 6th grade classroom, where my memory now has it being like, is it better to feed the mouse or not feed the mouse? They were sort of like testing his energy levels, if they fed him good food or bad food over the course of a couple of weeks. And the year was coming to an end, and I was like, I'm stealing this animal and bringing him home. And so that was pretty much right around when I stopped eating meat that I, was like, I'm going to actually step in when I can. Mm-hmm. And I started a little animal rights club in my high school, even though, I wasn't vegan. I didn't really come to it from that perspective yet. And I really just always had that mindset that if you can say something, you do say something. If you can do something, you do something. And it never seemed weird to me to go out and protest. This might just be because I grew up right by the United Nations, so there was always protests going on. And I sort of thought it was what everybody did. I was wrong.
When did you realize that? Like, oh, this isn't like everyone doesn't do this?
I think it was actually when I got to college. I expected everybody there to be really like, I don't know. I think I expected not like the 60s like hippies, but the 60s like the anti-war movement. I think I expected I would go to college and I would be recruited into the Weathermen. And I wasn't. And that was really disappointing for me. So pretty much I dropped out of school at that point.
That's when you have to start it yourself.
Oh.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that in my manual. Freshman orientation manual.
Oh, they didn't give you that manual, sorry.
But I mean, obviously not actually anything nearly as cool as that, but that is pretty much what I decided to do, I left school. I tried to find, other animal rights kids who wanted to actually, try and pretty much at that point, our main goal was we were going to try to fuck shit up. We didn't know how, we didn't know what, but we were going to try and actually make a dent and see if we couldn't actually start putting animal abusers on notice. And yeah, then that's kind of how I spent a bunch of years.
Do you feel like you achieved those goals in those years?
Yes. I feel I really do feel like getting to do animal rights activism in the late 90s it put you in kind of a time where there was real change being made. And I think that, one of the ways we see how successful the movement was just how fast and horribly the repression came down.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's like the 96, 97 was when I really started getting active. So the late 90s, like that through about 2001 was so much different than it is today. Like it's really, I feel like if you weren't there, you didn't realize how much was really going on.
I know, and you didn't really. I mean, I'm not good at explaining it to people who weren't there, which then makes me sound like an old, out of touch fogey.
Thank you, because I feel like that a lot too.
And I don't think, I don't actually believe that to be the case, because I mean, I don't actually think everything I did had the results I hoped for it to have. I don't think, if I could go back and do it, I would be smarter and more strategic. But at the same time, that much energy and that much real substantive, I don't know, just that real substantive momentum of more and more people were getting involved. Especially when you look at different towns, you actually saw people's attitudes towards the movement changing. You saw, businesses changing their corporate practices. You saw the things that you want to see to believe that your social justice movement is achieving some of its goals.
And there was real solid wins, like really big solid wins. Yeah.
And then, I don't know. I also don't know how much of having been a part of it in the 90s and then having also, then lived through kind of the repressive era means that we view things in terms of the 90s way it worked. And if we could find a way to defeat, these repressions and get back to that, that would work. But also during this period, all of a sudden the internet came along and changed everything in a completely different way as well. So I never know. I never would, as I try to figure out, how I could be a part of making the movement more robust now, which tactic to take, to try and sort of rejuvenate some of that energy or do something completely different. I can never quite decide.
You're making me think of back to the Battle of Seattle, to quote what they call it now. I remember being there, and I don't know if you could achieve the same level of cohesiveness and coming together that you would now. I mean, at that time, the internet was very new. I think indie media is what really pushed a lot of that. That's where I was getting my information when I was there and helping disseminate it. I think that's what started indie media, if I remember right.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. But it was so new that, it was only really available to the activists. I don't think people outside knew what was really happening online, how they were connecting. And I don't think we could recapture those same type of momentums that we did. Or in, what was it, in 2000, all the Shack protests through New Jersey and New York, that same type of momentum. I don't know if the state would allow those type of connections to be made.
And I mean, I don't think that back then the state had thought about going, okay, well, let's view the connections themselves as dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also don't know now with people's attentions being, there's so many different ways to get people's attention. There's so many different ways to lose people's attention that the rationale behind getting those huge masses together, getting that sort of coordinated action was that it somehow like it amplified the statement exponentially rather than just, by the number of people who actually got to show up. And I don't know if that's true now. It's hard. Everybody's gotten very, and rightfully so, skeptical of what is coming across when they see something, via mainstream or social media.
So how do you feel about the quote unquote armchair activism or internet activism that I see most of the youth, really taking as their foothold today?
It's hard for me to get incredibly passionate about it. I mean, I think there's some things that are, I guess if we're talking about, I want to like bifurcate it into online petitions versus, call-ins. And I would, I don't have a lot of faith in online petitions. And I don't have a lot of faith in people thinking that, forwarding online petitions or putting up sad pictures or happy pictures on their newsfeed to their friends is going to make a difference. I do think it's important that if there are people who are trying to run a campaign or if there are people who are working in support of a prisoner and they say, we're asking you, from the comfort of your home to do this and support our larger campaign, that we do it, I don't know if if flooding a phone line is actually going to be the thing that makes the change, but it certainly at least brings a little bit of the point that the people who are willing to be on the front lines aren't alone out into the public eye. So I have really mixed feelings on it, I guess, I have mixed feelings on most things. Sometimes sometimes strategies are used well, sometimes they're used poorly.
I think it's a good, well-rounded approach to I think that we fall into the trap so many times of, well, this strategy worked this one time, so we're going to use it, on the next 3 times, whether it works, again or not, but it worked once, so we're going to stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, and my other concern is, so I don't want to call anybody out because I think it was a good faith error, but there was this pig wrestle that happened in a town near Minneapolis, where it was like you essentially mud wrestle a pig for charity for some sort of church benefit. It was going on for, I think 38 years. And last year, a group of activists went and they really disrupted the event. They really got a lot of attention locally. They really made it no fun to have the pig wrestle anymore. And this year, they announced they were retiring the tradition. They're not going to do this. And I saw somebody put up something, a respected activist who I think really does a lot of good work. He went, you see, online petitions work, because there was a huge, huge worldwide online petition against this thing. And everybody was talking about it. And I was like, this is everything that's wrong with how we now understand each other. Because you can know enough about a given event to know, oh yeah, that happened, and I thought it was horrible, and a lot of people worldwide thought it was horrible too. And that's now your story, and 20 people got up at 4 a.m. They, drove from Minneapolis. And I was not one of the people here. This is not a story where I'm a hero. This is a story where, I'm a bystander. But, a bunch of people actually disrupted their own ordinary lives to go out and make a scene. I'm entirely sure that's what actually ended up, winning the day. But because there's so much going on and our attention is so just all over the place, all is the 3 headlines, that pigs are going to be wrastled. Online petition happens. Pigs no longer wrastled. So
I find myself getting into similar, I don't want to say arguments, but points of discussions with people when it comes to social change and pacifism, where I'm all for pacifism if it worked, but to my knowledge, any social justice movement in the history of the world has never succeeded with pacifism alone. And they always try to convince me that it has. And I always feel like it's, they're just looking at the wrong side, like you're saying that same activist did. He's just looking at it the wrong way.
I think it's also, I've known pacifists who hate that pacifist argument as much as, I hate that pacifist argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a pacifist, but the pacifists who I know, who I really respect, their argument is, I don't know if it's going to work or if it's not, but you can't make a better world while imitating the world you hate, and it's just not it's not a good argument that we should keep doing something because it was successful, alone, nor is it a good argument that we should not do something entirely because it hasn't been successful so far.
And when it comes to pacifism, for me, I guess my biggest argument is not necessarily like going out and saying, we shouldn't use it as a tactic, but when a lot of pacifists come out and then they'll attack, groups like the ALF or the ELF, and they'll be like, see, this doesn't work. It's like, well, no, you're not understanding that, it needs to be more well-rounded. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess for me, pacifism, the only reason I'm inclined to step back and let somebody who actually believes in it, be the person who sort of discusses it, is because it's like veganism.
Yeah.
If you actually believe that there's a real, daily social horror going on that you need to opt out of, I totally am willing to have the humility to go, I might be wrong and you might be right. Something that inspires people to that deep and self-sacrificing a belief. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of people who just use the phrase, meaning like, I'm uncomfortable with these tactics. I'm uncomfortable with property damage. I'm uncomfortable with violence. So they want to call themselves a pacifist. I have very little time to argue things where people are trying to claim identities rather than actually figure out what they are comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with and why.
Something you said earlier reminded me of going to a Foie Gras protest and being there. We pretty much went on a daily basis, and I thought I was doing something super powerful. And eventually the restaurant owner came out and said that they were going to stop serving foie gras, that they had gotten their gasoline, or their not gasoline, their gas turned off, and like spray paint thrown on their windows and stuff like that. And so here I thought we were being super effective going out there every time, but what really stopped them was other outside things. And so, that really opened up my eyes to realize that,
But then I hear that story, and what I have to assume is that, if you're the individual trying to make that call of where you might turn, that sort of subversive intention, if you're trying to figure out, if I have an hour tonight to go and really fuck some shit up, what am I going to try and fuck up?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a coincidence that it's, the place people have been standing outside of. So I'm a big tent sort of person when it comes to tactics.
Yeah. I'm not saying that in any way that protesting is not a good tactic. I was only observing from my, like, it really opened up my eyes, I think, because I thought that, wow, they stopped because of us, but no, they came out and said there are other things that happen.
I think one of the hard lessons I've had to learn is that protesting isn't necessarily as strong as a tactic as I thought it was when I first became an activist. Like I guess like when I first became, I thought it was like, you know, you go out there, you say it, and then shit changes, and then the harsh reality is that most of the time shit doesn't change.
Well, it's also like rhetoric isn't as good a tactic as, you know, that one I'm still learning, that like I can't actually be convincing enough to change people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I don't think that's actually because like I'm so bad at being convincing. I'm certainly not the world's best, you know, best debater or anything like that. But it's just that most people's beliefs are they're so deeply held that, you know, talking, standing, screaming, people are going to find any excuse not to change their minds.
So what is like something that the animal rights movement as a community isn't doing enough of that you would like to see happening more or happen at all? Like maybe it's not happening at all.
I mean, I would really like to see the animal rights community treat intersectionality not as a tool, but, you know, we talk about veganism as a moral baseline or something, or I don't talk about that. But that is a statement that has been said by people.
Yes.
If we're going to have a moral baseline, I actually want it to be, you know, an intersectional focus on opposing oppression and on not treating ourselves like the resident experts in everything.
It's something that's actually super surprising to me. I just don't see how. It's really hard for me to see other vegans when they're saying things that are, you know, sexist or racist. Not necessarily racist, but you see them being oppressive to other groups, but then being vegan as well, and it's just hard to understand how they can be both.
And also just not being willing to face up to it, because you know that's what's harder to me to see, because I certainly am willing to believe if somebody says that, you know, I'm acting in a way that is not sensitive, that is, you know, coming off as racist or sexist, that I might be, and to try and not take that personally. But just to be like, if you're calling me out, you're wrong. That attitude, how prevalent it is in this movement, just drives me up the wall. And I feel like it's our version of if I'm sitting in a table with 10 people who are ordering steaks, and when I ask for salad dressing, they tell me that, you know, I'm attacking their life choices. Mm-hmm. It's just our version of that. And I feel like it's much more important to me now than it used to be, both because I think we have these great opportunities to make connections with people because we have the internet, we have kind of a much wider field, and we can meet people who are a lot different than ourselves more easily. And it's also important because I don't know if it's just because I've gotten smarter or more educated, or just because it's really become clear how far behind we are the broad left on these issues.
You know, when you talk about, you know, making intersectionality not just a tool, or I feel like the older I've gotten, like, for me, I started out as an animal rights activist. That was what brought me on my path. Like, that's, you know, and I was introduced to everything else later. I was introduced to, you know, really what feminism was later, really what, you know, sexism was later, really
Trans
what
rights
racism and trans, like, animal rights really is what brought me towards that, workers' rights, all of it. And I feel like in some senses, it's not that it's not the most important thing, but it's almost been put on a side while other things have taken a lot more of my time. And is that kind of like what you mean by that? Or, you know, like, how can you know, have animal rights, you know, be more section with other social justice movements and keep it at like your forefront?
I think that there's three parts to this to me. There's differentiating your personal veganism from animal rights activism.
Mm-hmm.
There's recognizing, for me, it's not getting caught up in like the consumerism that is available now that wasn't available when I started out, you know?
But it's so good.
It is so good. No, I'm not saying don't get Gardein chicken wings. You know, I'm just saying I'm just saying that I don't feel like we're winning if my activism is actually just advertising Gardein.
Okay, yeah.
You know? And but just on a personal level, just kind of trying to keep that to the side. That only goes so far. And so if I'm talking about animal rights activism, I'm talking about a campaign. You know, I'm talking about being part of, you know, the No New Animal Labs or whatever it might be. Just trying to work in support of a campaign. And also, yeah, I mean, for me, I think because I'm not super active in any one particular campaign right now, and I am instead doing stuff like trying to work on support vegans in the prison system. I'm, you know, working with a group in New York that has a vegan animal rescue. When I'm trying to think about being a better critical thinker so I can be a better part of changing the world, it has to do with filling in these gaps in my knowledge and, you know, becoming a better citizen. I don't need to be a better vegan. I'm pretty good at not accidentally eating whey. Mm-hmm. I do need to be a better environmentalist. You know, I do need to be a better anti-racist.
Do you ever fall into the trap of, because I know I do, of sometimes just being like, well, I'm vegan, that's fucking enough?
I mean, I think I fall into the trap of being like, I put my pants on today. That's enough. You know, I look at how screwed up everything is, and I deserve to give myself a medal, you know? And I do give myself a medal some days just for that. And I think we all should. I mean, it's sort of like giving yourself good self-care is part of animal rights in that, like, I'm an animal, you're an animal sort of way. Mm-hmm. But I try not to let myself get too many days where I get a pass just because I'm already a vegan, mm-hmm. or because, you know, whatever else it might be, you know, because I was successful in my pant putting on endeavor.
I think we talked to maybe Mike XVX about it, about some of the stuff that we see as activists can really affect us, and like it can even like lead to PTSD and stuff like that. And so self-care is super important in activism.
And it's something that it's really easy to get. It's easy to get ashamed of. It's also, you know, for me, there's so much emotional drive that specifically when we're talking about what happens when I'm dealing with questions of animal cruelty, when I'm dealing with specifically animal rights stuff, I can't intellectualize it. It is emotional. And so there's very little that's harder to face than when people are going, God, you're quote unquote, you're being so emotional. You know? So self-care is recognizing that it's okay to be so emotional, which is not something that we are typically rewarded for allowing ourselves to be.
You know, you brought up your work with prisoner support, and that's one of the things that we have always tried to talk to people about and, you know, make them more aware of and be, you know, more active in. And it's also probably the biggest thing that I need to be more active in myself. So like, what are you doing for that?
So what I do is actually really niche in a lot of ways. And, you know, I'm going to preface this with saying we all should try and stretch ourselves to reach out to prisoners, you know. We should try to write as many letters as we're comfortable with, and then one more, because it really does matter. But when I mention support vegans in the prison system, what we focus on is, with being just a couple of people with not a ton of, you know, resources at our disposal, dealing with immediate queries that we get from prisoners who are not having luck getting vegan food when they're asking for it. They're not all movement prisoners. In fact, some of the stuff that I've found most rewarding is that we do get just random emails from people who they're like, oh, you know, I've got a trial coming up. I'm worried what's going to happen, and finding out that they're not alone and there's somebody who, you know, I'm not saying that we can always actually make a prison that is denying somebody, you know, a vegan tray, give it over. But we do have some tricks up our sleeves that have been successful. And so we just do our best to, you know, either amplify the voice of a support team that has a strategy to get somebody vegan food, or to just work quietly and actually make sure that people are, when they're getting almost all of their personal liberty and personal autonomy denied them, that they don't have to feel like they have to give that part of themselves up to.
So if somebody is going into one of these institutions, what kind of advice would you give them? Because, you know, I know Jordan's been there. I know I've been there, where, like, you know, you get in there and you try to work the administration. You get there and you're filling out all your paperwork through booking, and you're like, oh yeah, I need a vegan meal. And they're just like, you can't be demanding here. And they'll throw you in solitary right then, you know. Like, what do you recommend for people going through that process?
Certainly I recommend that you think about it as soon as you can beforehand. Like, you actually start to think about, like what you're going to do and how much a part of this, your broader legal strategy, you want this to be, because it's such a case by case thing. Because, like, if you're going to go into the county jail for a week versus you're going to federal prison for 10 years, and you have an appeal coming up and you have other issues you need to face, you know, maybe you go, I'm lucky enough to have money that people threw in my commissary. I'm just not going to fight this. I'm going to let this be a small part of what I'm doing. Or, you know, I have a lot of people on my side who are willing to make a big stink. I'm going to try and prep for a call-in day immediately. So I don't have any really, like, overarching advice, because it can go so many different ways. You know, sometimes this is one of the things where it's funny. It actually, the need is getting greater. There are more people asking, you know, how do I be vegan in prison than there were a few years ago. But there's actually more institutions that are starting to have policies, you know, like, because it's easier to have a preemptive policy where they will just give you a tray.
I know one of the issues that we faced with Jordan when he was in prison was he got transferred to a new facility, and so they weren't giving him a tray. So we started a new call-in campaign for him, which they then internalized and punished him for in prison.
They considered it as a security threat for the facility. Yeah, and I mean, I am not... This is, again, where it's like there's absolutely no one size fits all. Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis for sure.
And that was the first time I had heard of the actual person being punished for it. But it kind of makes you think about it, and made me think about it in a different way, at least.
I mean, I always come from this perspective where if somebody asks us to help, I always want to actually get in touch with the person who's currently incarcerated. Because, I always expect that, like, if you all of a sudden have a bunch of people on the outside talking about one particular vulnerable individual, and that's what you are when you're in prison, you're a vulnerable individual, then they're the person who's in risk. You know, they're the person who's going to get, thrown in the hole or get, like physically abused or whatever it is. So I never want to tell people what to do. I want to find out what people need and where they're coming from, and then see how I can help.
What advice would you give to people who want to get more involved in prisoner support, or even just the very, vegan prisoner support?
I think advice I would give to people who want to get more involved is to try to reach out within their community and find out if there is somebody, if there's somebody who is local to them, who you could go visit, who you could, actually be hooked into their support team. Because there's a lot, and certainly I would always say, write to prisoners if that's in you. Be a part of anti-prison work, whether you consider it like restorative justice or prison abolition or whatever you want to call it, if you don't know how to actually, if you don't want to get involved with working with prisoners one-on-one, just be a part of anti-prison work, because that's what's missing. That's what's missing, the connection. And that's sort of why I feel like being responsive to the interests of prisoners who are asking for vegan food and not getting it it's so important and like personal to me, because it's not about saying that, these 10 guys I know, they're the good prisoners and all the other guys deserve to be there, because it's so much more complicated than that. There's this dehumanizing industry, and I'm going to, at least anytime somebody asks me to try to help and give them a tiny bit of their humanity back, I'm going to do it. That probably didn't really answer your question, but.
No, I mean, it totally does. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you started getting involved in some of the work that you did. For example, your Foie Gras stuff. If you want to talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
I got involved with doing open rescue in the early 2000s, I guess around 2003, because, I was really invested with a small group of other activists in the kind of like New York region. And we had a lot of trust in each other, and there was a foie gras farm there. And that was really a moment where open rescue was, for a lot of different reasons, a really successful tactic to employ. So we started going to this foie gras farm in the dead of night a lot, trying to get enough footage to really show people what the foie gras industry was doing at a time where the only other video you could see of foie gras was from 15 years earlier or so. And so really trying to make it immediate to people in a way that it hadn't been. And I kind of feel like I have these memories of it, and it took us, I don't know, maybe 9 months to really feel like we presented the full picture. And today with like GoPro cameras, I feel like I could have done it in 2 weeks. But yeah, so, we released this 16-minute movie we cut, and we really tried to get a ton of mainstream media attention to it, and we succeeded. And then you saw pretty quickly after that a bunch of responses from certain towns having huge foie gras campaigns, to first Chicago banning foie gras and having that overturned, and then California making the production and sale of foie gras illegal. So it was to me, it feels like something that was very clearly successful. And even today, where part of the law banning foie gras was overturned, still the only foie gras farm in California went out of business. And so that took it from there being 3 states in the country that had foie gras farms to them only being 2. And one of them is sadly Minnesota. So
do you think that part of the reason why you decided to focus on foie gras was like geographical, or?
I think part of it's geographical, but part of it is it was really personal to me. I grew up really loving ducks. And I think that's another peculiarity of having grown up in a really big city. They were the only animals I'd ever like seen, you know, that were actually being used for food. You know, you would go to a Central Park and you could feed the ducks, or, you know. So what I like to say is I had seen them so I could see them. You know, they felt really real to me in a way that at that point in my life, I opposed all of these forms of animal cruelty, but it was a little more abstract. Ducks were really not abstract to me, and they never were. So when the opportunity presented itself to like, you can rescue some, you can rehabilitate them, it didn't seem like something I even could have said no to.
Wow, holy cow, we're already at past an hour. Time has flown. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
How can people get in contact with you, follow your work, and, you know, give you support?
The best way people can kind of find me on the internet is probably my Twitter, which I will say I don't use as much as I might, but I think if people started following me and talking to me on it, I probably would start to. So I am at SarahJane Blum on Twitter, and you can find me there. And yeah, give me more good things to think about. I always want smart people to talk to me and challenge me on things.
Well, we end every episode saying fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Well, fuck, shit, damn. Of course not.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah,
you have a wonderful
really
weekend.
Fun. Thanks.
You as well. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This week you heard
Watership song by User's Atmosphere.
Right now you're listening to
Road song by Desolation Wilderness. I like that they both had to clarify that they're songs.
Oh, did they? I didn't even pay attention.
Watership song and Road song.
Oh, that's funny. It's ironic that I picked both those for this week and didn't even pay attention to that. I was just going down my list of possible songs. But hey, as always, iTunes. We need your love and support on iTunes. Most of you are listening through iTunes, so just quickly rate and review us. It helps out the show so tremendously. It just increases our search ratings, basically, is what it does. Mm-hmm. So go rate us, review us, help us get better search results for when you look up things like vegan or anarchist or vegan anarchist or vegan or veganism. You know, it just really helps. So,
and if you haven't already done so, subscribe to us through iTunes as well, because that helps. Even if you're subscribed through us through another RSS, if you go onto iTunes and hit subscribe on there, it does help boost our ratings. So that'd be super cool.
And if you've already done all that, you know, do us a solid, do it to other people for them, because it's free and they might enjoy it.
Hashtag go subscribe. Hashtag ghost review.
Hashtag I just did this. I don't know why.
Hashtag which side is awesome at which side pod.
Hashtag.
That's meta. Speaking of hashtags, if you haven't liked us or become our friend on social media, you should do so. It's super easy. All you have to do is go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the social tab, find all of our social medias, and like us. Be our friend. We often say things on there that we don't talk about on the show. So do it.
And say hi.
Yeah, we respond. Unlike some people.
Is it fuck shit damn time?
I think so, yeah. Let's just fuck shit damn it.
Okay.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.